Good morning. My name is Andrea Davis. I am one of the programme managers at the Civil Service College, and I am joined by our trainer today that is going to be with you for the next hour, David Pearson. David is going to be delivering a session this morning on why is the word love taboo in the workplace. This particular session is in contribution to Pride Month 2021. It's the first time we are actually doing something like this. We're very, very excited to have David with us this morning. David is also going to be our lead facilitator to our ED&I Virtual Summit, which will be taking place in September. So please do find out more information, stick with us till the very, very end, and we'll give you some more information on that. I just want to remind everyone to please remember to keep your cameras and microphones off. Do not put your microphones on or off because it can disrupt the webinar. So I just want to reload my slides 1 second there because it's saying that it's just run up. So just bear with me. There we go. Can you see that, David, okay? Fantastic. Yes. Good stuff. Right, so I just want everyone to take part in today's session. We want maximum participation. We want lots of questions. If David is touching on a topic that you would like to share your comments and thoughts on, please use the chat box. The chat function is there for you to use. We don't want anyone to keep back or hold back on anything. We want you to put all your thoughts in the chat box as we go along. There will be time for Q&A at the very, very end, but again, we want you to try and get involved as much as possible. So you will be with us for the next hour. We want to hear from you all. So if we just move on. So again, we've got the fantastic David with us this morning. There's a bit about David on the screen. I'm not going to go through everything because he does have quite an impressive bio here. So just a little bit about David. David is an award-winning leadership and inclusion expert, keynote speaker and presenter, and the creator of the UK's only in-house LGBT inclusive leadership certification. David, as a director, is global inclusion and diversity at KPMG, and has supported inclusion for more than 200,000 people in 154 countries. That's really impressive, David. With a background in KPMG's corporate finance practice, he is currently undertaking groundbreaking research in the field of leadership, culture and inclusion. He's also patron of Freedom to Donate, a trustee of ELOP, LGBT Mental Health and Wellbeing, and an alumni of the Stonewall Leadership Programme. So there's a little bit more about David, and I'm sure he will fill you in as we go along. And finally, in 2017, he was named a NatWest Top 10 Diversity Champion, and in 2019 as the Channel 4 Diversity Hero of the Year. David, that's so impressive. I'm sure you will fill in our audience members a bit more about who you are and what you do and so on. But what I'm going to do for now is hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Andrea, for a lovely welcome, and good morning to everyone, wherever you are around the country. Andrea, if you click forward to the next slide, I thought it might be nice to start things off with a bit of letting go. So this is where the pen and paper come in that Andrea mentioned before. If you're able to just grab a scrap of paper and a pen or a pencil, that would be great. Because I'm conscious that our work lives and our daily lives, and let's face it, for some of us, those two things have merged into the one thing, haven't they? Often carry stress and distractions. So I thought we could take a moment for some, I guess, self-love, yeah, just to create and give ourselves the gift of a bit of space. So if you could take that blank piece of paper now, and with your pen or pencil, write down anything, just as a dot point or as a couple of words, anything that's on your mind at the moment. Anything that could be distracting you, anything that could get in the way of your being able to focus on this session. And it could be things that are happening to do with your home. It could be to do with work. It could be anything else at all. It could be something negative, but equally it could be something positive. Maybe you've just had some really good news and you can't stop thinking about it. So just write down a couple of words. It doesn't need to be a long description, and this is all private. You're not sharing this with anyone. And I'll just give you a moment to finish doing that. And once you're done, what I'll invite you to do is to take that piece of paper and screw it up tightly into a ball. and then throw it away over your shoulder. If there's anyone else in the room with you, try not to hit them on the head. But just let it sit in the corner of the room for the duration of this session and let go of whatever that thing is. Now, it's up to you. If you want to pick that up again later, you can. If you want to kind of reconnect with whatever that thing is that's been distracting you. And if it's something negative, you might choose just not to pick it up again. Yeah, you could let go of it. So if we could go to the next slide. Thanks, Andrea. What I thought I'd just explain to you, you know, when I present and do sessions like this, whether they're internal at work or whether they're external, I often share rules of the road. And I just find that's a great way to frame the session so we know what we all expect. So my rules for this session are that I want to create a space that's safe and respectful and coming from a place of love. But you've heard of the expression tough love, so I'm not going to do any spoon feeding today. I believe firmly that most of the learning from sessions like this comes later when you've had a chance to reflect on it. Yeah. And this is an introductory session only. I mean, this topic is really deep, so I can't pretend that I'm going to do justice to it in just the space of about 50 minutes to an hour. So I need your permission to be able to treat this as really just a skimming of the surface of this topic and getting you thinking about it. Yeah. So normally, if I can see you, I would all get you to agree to the rules by raising your hand. But in this particular context, I'm simply going to say that I invite you to adopt these rules of the road for this session. And if you decide that you don't like these rules and that you can't abide by these rules and they're not appropriate, then of course you're welcome to duck out of the session, but I do hope everyone stays. So let's go to the next slide, please, Andrea. So why is the word love taboo in the workplace? That's the title of this session. It's the provocative thing that we're going to explore, and I thought it would be helpful as we do this and explore this interesting topic to have three questions in mind. The first question is, why is love taboo in the workplace? The second is around what does love in action look like in the workplace? And the third is kind of related. It's what practical things can we do, all of us, to drive belonging in the workplace? Now, I want you to note that I've said here, why is the word love taboo in the workplace? I haven't said, why is love taboo in the workplace? That's a different topic. We're not primarily here today to talk about romantic love, although, of course, romances sometimes happen in the workplace, don't they? Interestingly, the ancient Greeks had more than half a dozen words for love. In English, we're sort of stuck. We've pretty much just got the one word love. And we have to make do with that. But I just wanted you to remember that we're not really talking about romantic love today. We're talking about other types of love. So why is the word love taboo in the workplace? What do you think? Please put your thoughts in the chat box there as to why you think the word love is taboo in the workplace. I'd be interested to see what your thinking is. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to share that I took part in an online global forum a couple of months ago that was hosted by IBM around inclusion and diversity. And I posted this question as part of that forum, and I got a number of interesting responses. In particular, a couple of people flagged two things that stuck with me, and I'm going to share what those are in a minute and what I made of those. I love the comment here saying people automatically think of romantic love. Yeah, that's true. Meenaxi says, you know, too many barriers. John, you say unprofessional. I'm going to pick that up because that's one of the comments that was made. Emma, yeah, the association with the romantic meaning, isn't it? And then Rona says there's many different ways in which love can be felt, experienced and interpreted, and maybe that's what makes it taboo. I love the comment there, Meenaxi. People think it's just about sex. Exactly. Leslie says people may be thought of as being soft and not work focused. You know, love is something that's too soft. Not appropriate for managers and staff. The work environment is too sterile. Yes, that's a great comment, Florence. And Chloe says, you know, it could be misconstrued. It can cause conflicts and difficulties with management, says Rebecca. You know, there could be favoritism and so on. These are all fantastic comments, by the way. Thank you. So there's two things that struck me from that forum I took part. One was very much what one of your responses was, that it was unprofessional. Yeah. Talking about love in the workplace is not professional. And I thought, well, okay, what does that actually mean? If that means leaving a major part of who we are as human beings at the door of the office, then I found that quite sad. And I kind of thought, do I really want to work in a workplace that thinks we have to kind of pretend that we're not human beings? Yeah. So I wanted to explore what this unprofessional bit meant. The other is a comment made that if we keep talking about love all the time, then we will devalue it, we'll cheapen it. And again, that got me thinking, and I thought, oh, well, okay, that's an interesting perspective. But then I thought, we talk about money all the time, and yet we don't perceive that we're cheapening money by talking about it. It still retains its power. You can still buy things with money even if you talk about it all the time. So I found that puzzling again. Why does love get cheapened when we talk about it, whereas money doesn't? Now, I'm not saying there's right or wrong answers there. I don't know the answers, but I found it really interesting to think about those responses. And I like Minaxi's comment there as well. Are we showing our vulnerable side by showing love in the workplace? I think that could be another clue to perhaps why the word love is taboo. I think it has something to do with making people uncomfortable. I think it has something to do with the power structures in most workplaces, whereby leaders feel that if they are expected to express love, or if the workplace is expected to manifest love, that it's something they can't control, and that's a worry. But that's a deep philosophical discussion for another time. We're going to go on to our next slide. And here I thought I would share some statistics, because belonging has emerged as a key aspect of inclusion in recent years. I mean, one study has found that workplace belonging can lead to an estimated 56% increase in job performance. It can lead to a 50% reduction in turnover risk and a 75% decrease in employee sick days. So just those stats alone are quite compelling, aren't they? And yet, if you were to ask yourself, have I ever felt loved in any of the places I've worked? What would your answer be? Now, feel free to put a comment in the chat if you like on that question. For many of us, love is not an appropriate or relevant topic in the workplace. It's too private, it's too sentimental, or as we've said, it's unprofessional, whatever that means. So we're conditioned to leave that aspect of ourselves behind when we walk in the office door. And yet, the strongest sense of belonging that most of us ever experience is when we love and feel loved. And it's, this urge is one of the most fundamental things that makes us human, isn't it? So are we missing a trick by ignoring the power of love to foster belonging in the workplace? So I thought in this session we could explore this fascinating but neglected topic and discover why love is taboo in most organizations, what difference love in action could make, and how we can foster a powerful sense of belonging in the workplace through the actions that we take every day as leaders, as team members, and as colleagues. So we go to the next slide. We're going to do an interesting little experiment here, because we're kind of going to run some poll questions, but we don't actually have a poll facility, so it'll be sort of a virtual poll. And thanks everyone for your comments in the chat around whether you feel love. It's great to see some of you do, so that's awesome. I think, Minaxi, your comment there around leaders showing empathy is challenging, isn't it? Some leaders really don't connect and see empathy as part of their role as a leader. So keep those comments coming. That's great. So the first poll question is really, does your organization understand the challenges people from outside the dominant group face? So by dominant group, I mean those people within the organization who have power and influence, but then outside that, there'll be a group who have relatively less power or little power at all. And the question for you to think about is, does your organization understand the challenges that such people face? And they're often people who are from a minority group, from a diverse group. So it's some answers coming in there saying, yes and yes, but we mention belonging, but not specifically love. So thanks for that, Akinwale. And then the next question is, when it comes to inclusion, does your organization rely on process and policy or on culture? So this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because in some organizations, everything is fixed by having a policy on it, or having a process around it, while completely ignoring culture. Other organizations seem to focus a lot on culture, and they're not so much interested in process or policy. So it'd be interesting for you to reflect on that and think, for your organization, is there lots of policy and process and not much talk around culture? It's very hard to create belonging and a sense of love purely through process and policy. And then how often is love mentioned in your organization? Have a think about it. I mean, for some organizations, it's very much talked about, you know, and it's like loved is the main people, the main word that people use to describe how they feel in that workplace. Whereas in others, it's just never mentioned. Now, I've got a bonus question for you to come in a second, but later in this session, I'm going to share with you some actual poll results when I ran this poll live with a group, and you'd be very interested to see those results, I'm sure. Great to see Emma's comment there that very focused on culture at the moment. That's awesome to hear that there is a focus on culture. It's not an easy topic to deal with, but it's important. And then, Leslie, I love your comment. For question one, I guess that's a, yeah, not really. And then process and policy, talk a lot about culture. That's a really interesting comment, isn't it? It's one thing to actually understand culture change. It's another to just talk about it. So if we go to the next slide, please, and we'll have a look at the bonus poll question. This one is, what is the one thing missing in the workplace that would make the biggest difference to inclusion? Now here, you could think about options like process and policy. You could think about perhaps targeted support for minority colleagues. You could think about training. You could think about a true sense of love and belonging. You could think about psychological safety. So there's all sorts of options you could think about what is perhaps missing in the workplace that would really make a difference to inclusion. I won't give the game away now, but when we look at the actual results I got from a live poll on this later, you might be quite surprised. And I love this one from Paul, Better Communications. I think I've never come across an organization where communication could not be improved. I think it's the one area that we all need to keep working on, and it's a fundamental part of belonging. So if we go to the next slide, please, and I'm going to share with you a kind of thinking around love as the key towards creating radical belonging. And by the way, do keep any questions coming. And any comments. If you've got questions, I'll try to pick them up in the chat and make sure I address them as we go. And Emma, you're saying that we're proud to work at ONS, a change of wording there needed. So yeah, we love to work at ONS, could be a way to put that maybe. So what do we mean by a radical belonging, and what do we mean by this sort of idea of love is the key? I got obsessed with this topic around love in the workplace because a couple of years ago, I attended a number of roundtables, one of them hosted by the Bank of England. And I was in a room of about 20 plus senior executives and other people, and we were talking about different topics. And for some reason, the thought came into my mind, we never talk about love in the workplace. Why is that word never mentioned? So I flagged that as a question for this group, thinking most people would look at me blankly and think I'd stepped off a spaceship from Mars. But actually, the room sort of lit up with this sense of electricity, and people started thinking, yes, why don't we ever mention love? And I had a number of really senior executives saying it's a fascinating question. It was something they'd never thought about, and it was something they wanted to understand more about. And so I've been on a bit of a journey for the last couple of years myself trying to understand this. I've looked at some of the work of Brené Brown, who you might know. If you've not come across her, just Google Brené Brown. Lots of YouTube videos there around empathy. She does some really great work there based out of the US. So I've read up a lot on it. I've done research on it. And again, at the London School of Economics, I attended an event there and flagged this question. And at the end of this long evening event, the panel sort of voted on the key question that was raised from the audience in that session. And they all said this question around love was the most important question raised. So, you know, and I've done this time and again. I've done it with the private sector. I've done it in the public sector. I've done it with the third sector. And it always creates this resonance, this electricity in the room. And that's why you're getting this today from me. So if we go to the next slide, there's something I'd like you to think about. I'd like you to imagine that you are at a recruitment event for your organization, and a university student approaches you and says, "Hi, as a candidate from a diverse background, can I ask you something about your organization?" What will they ask you? So feel free to put some comments in the chat there around what kind of question you think you would get from a university student who is attending a careers event where your organization is represented, and they come up and say to you, can I ask you a question about your organization? What are they actually going to say? Now, I guess you could expect typical questions, I don't know, like, can you tell me about your diversity and inclusion policies? Maybe they might say, do you have any role models from diverse backgrounds? Do you have any people like me in senior positions? They might say, will you use my preferred pronouns? You know, will people do that? Do you have any staff diversity networks? They might ask, what's the culture of your organization like? Yeah. So Meenakshi says, how important is D&I in your organization? That could be a question they ask. Keep those thoughts coming in the chat box around what question you might be asked. But I've got a proposition for you. You may not agree with this. I think all of these questions are indeed typical, and they're likely that candidates will ask you those. But it's possible that what they're actually asking underneath all of those questions is, I'll reveal that in a second. I'll keep you on the edge of your seat. I'm just going to go to one of Akinwale's comments where he says, what is the working environment like? What is the inclusion situation? Is it diverse? Yeah, excellent. And those are the kind of questions you're likely to get. But I think what they're actually asking you, even though they're using different words, is this question. If I work at your organization, will I feel loved? Will I feel I belong? That's probably the fundamental question we all think about, isn't it, when we think about working somewhere, is will I belong here? Kerry says, would I like working for your organization? Is it safe for me to speak out if I see something that is unjust? And Amy says, do you feel loved? So you may disagree with me. You may think, no, they're not asking about will I feel loved and belonging. But I suspect that's actually what's going on underneath all of the kinds of questions we get. And there's something puzzling to me around inclusion, yeah, especially in the context of some diverse groups in the workplace. You know, if we think, for example, for a moment, and this is Pride season, as Andrea said, we're celebrating Pride season in this session. If you think of the LGBT plus community, of all groups, that community knows what it feels like to be shamed because of love. Yeah, we know what it feels like to be told our love is wrong. And I, as a member of the LGBT plus community, know that feeling. So for us, probably more than any other diverse community, love is the key. And yet, no one seems to be paying any attention to the role of love in creating belonging in the workplace, either for LGBT plus people or indeed for anyone else. And if you think of the strongest expression of belonging that you can, you know, think of a mother holding her child in her arms of love. Think of the safety and the belonging that child experiences in those arms of love. And then think of your average experience in the workplaces you've been in. Did you feel loved, valued? Did you feel radical belonging? Do you feel it now in your current workplace? Do you think your colleagues feel that? And if not, why not? So I see some more comments here. Leslie saying it would be nice if we could use the art of allowing while following the correct policies and procedures. Just if we allow people to be who they are and enjoy and share in their differences and characteristics, that would make them feel loved and give a sense of belonging. I love that, Leslie. That's a great insight into how to create a sense of belonging for people in the workplace. So to explore how love and belonging manifest themselves in the workplace, I'm going to put a scenario to you and get you to think about what you would do in this scenario. So imagine this. You're a newly appointed manager or leader in your organization, and your manager comes to you and says, I need to have a chat with you about something. Can you come and see me? Says, look, I've got a tricky issue. Some of the staff here are pushing for us to do lots of diversity and inclusion things, but we're getting resistance from other colleagues. Basically, they think we are going over the top on inclusion and diversity. And there have been particular complaints about things like the Women's Network pushing for more women to be promoted and represented in senior roles. The LGBT network are pushing for gender neutral toilets. They want to celebrate Bi Visibility Day, and they want, people to discuss things like people's pronouns. The ethnicity networks are trying to celebrate different history months and special days, and the disability network is calling for us to be more accessible and create accessibility in the workplace. And it's all getting people annoyed. We may have to tone all of this down, or we risk alienating the majority of our employees. We're also being directed by leaders at the top and in the centre to stick only to the minimum of what we need to do legally under the Equality Act 2010. So given that scenario, what do you do? Now, feel free to put comments in the chat around how would you respond if your manager called you in and basically said, we're doing too much on diversity and inclusion, we need to tone it down. How would you respond to that? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to show you something that kind of helps to resolve this paradox. So on the next slide, we can see what you've encountered here is what I call the inclusion paradox. And it's about, on the one hand, if we just go to the next slide, a focus. So on the one hand, you've kind of got this focus on diverse groups in the workplace, yeah, which seems to set people apart as different. And that can tend to disconnect them from the rest of the organization. And in some cases, it can create resentment from the majority of employees. But on the other hand, a focus on inclusion for different groups can provide a sense of belonging that encourages employees to remain with the organization and to flourish and grow. And the more you emphasize a person or community's distinctive attributes, the particular things that make them special and different, and the more you raise awareness of those in the workplace, for example, through staff networks, then the more you run the risk of reducing those people or communities down to just a limited set of characteristics. And this can erase the fullness and richness of individuals and of communities. Now, you'll know this is happening when you're in your organization. When you hear comments, I guess, along the lines of, well, I don't want to join the LGBT network because I hate being known as, the gay manager. Or you might hear someone say something like, look, I don't want to be promoted just because I'm a woman, so I avoid going to the women's network events. But on the other hand, the more you minimize these important differences, the more you erase their uniqueness, and you risk trivializing the barriers that people from diverse backgrounds face. And you'll know when this is happening because you'll start to hear comments in your organization from people saying things like, well, I don't care what a person's sexuality is or their race or whatever, because I treat everyone the same. Or you might hear someone say something like, I'm glad we operate as a meritocracy here. After all, your gender or ethnicity has nothing to do with being good at your job. Now, those comments sound like they're supportive, but in fact, they are just erasing people's identities and ignoring the barriers those people face. I can tell you a secret. As a practitioner around leadership and inclusion, I haven't yet come across a meritocracy. So if you hear people in your organization claiming to be a meritocracy, I think you need to stop and think what proof they have that it's a meritocracy. I've yet to find one. Possibly the nearest I've ever come across is the military, but even that isn't a proper meritocracy. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyway, either way, you can end up with disgruntled employees, right? Either someone from the majority or someone from the minority. So how on earth do you get it right? Well, there's lots of possibilities, but I'll let you into my answer to this paradox, which is these things are not mutually exclusive. They don't automatically disadvantage one group over another. And we can understand this better if we look at this simplified identity matrix that I've got showing here on the screen, because here you can see that resolving the paradox is about flexing how your organization responds to the things that make people from a diverse group unique because of their diversity and because they're individuals, and the things that they have in common with others because of their diversity and because they are human beings. So that allows your colleagues to be situated in their complex identities better, yeah, with reference, for example, to being from a minority community whilst also being a human being. Now, some of those characteristics themselves might have particular challenges that arise from ethnicity, from age, from disability, and so on. And this matrix is extremely simplified. A more complex one would have multiple axes on it and take into account lots of different dimensions. So before we move on to the next slide, just some questions for you in relation to this matrix. Where do you see yourself on this? Or if you don't identify as being from any diverse group, where do you think your colleagues see themselves on this matrix? Where do you think your organization places its focus? Is it on particular quadrants? Is it on a single quadrant? Is it somewhere in the middle? Does your organization's focus shift over time? Or is there something your organization pays no attention to whatsoever? No right or wrong answer, but I just put this out to you as a way of potentially resolving this paradox around belonging for people who are from diverse backgrounds. Now, we're going to move on to the next slide. And then while I do that, I just want to address some of the comments in the chat, because I see lots of great comments coming in here. So in terms of sort of resolving this paradox, I love Amy's comment. They're fighting words there. The fact that people are opposed to it shows why we need to keep doing it. That's awesome. You know you're doing the right thing when people are, I was going to use some slang there, arcing up. In other words, when people are complaining, it probably means you're doing something right, because it's all about change, and people don't like change, do they? Doing change with love is a great approach, though. And then Emma notes there, what are the benefits of what we are doing? Why would we stop when there are benefits? Akinwale says education will be critical to change people's opinion. Absolutely. When you understand something, you're much more likely to appreciate it, aren't you? And see another's point of view. John mentions there, being your authentic self is paramount. This takes us back to the comment at the very start around leaving part of yourself at the door, yeah, when you come to the office. Emma says, we never stop learning, so why would you try to minimize that? What a fantastic comment. If you frame this issue as being about learning, it's very hard to say, isn't it? Well, we should stop learning. So I love that approach. It's really clever. Leslie talks about, would it be a case of discussing why some are resistant to the idea, and asking how they think others feel about them, and what it is that makes them feel uncomfortable with inclusion of all. And again, that's a really fantastic approach, Leslie, to kind of encourage people to think about things from another's point of view. I mean, that's what empathy is, isn't it? It's understanding how things feel and what others experience. And Kerry says, I'd be inclined to push back and explain why it is important to show that we support all our staff by holding an even balance of events across the year. So great practical approach there. So I've just popped up a reminder to us all, and I need this reminder as much as anyone. We talk about diversity, and we often fall into the trap of thinking all diversity is visible. But if we go to the next slide, this might remind you that, of course, not all diversity is visible. Some of it is, but you might have colleagues who have a child with a disability. You may have people with different marital status, different politics, different socioeconomic backgrounds. There could be mental health issues you're not aware about. They may have a different cultural background that isn't obvious. They may have a parent with Alzheimer's. They might have military experience that you're unaware of and therefore be a veteran. They may have neurodiversity that doesn't show up, obviously, and you're not aware of that. So there's all sorts of ways, educational background, all of these things that may or may not show up as a visible difference. And so therefore, when you are focusing on fostering belonging in your organization, how do you know which people are diverse or not? Well, you often won't, will you? So you need to be careful about the assumptions you make. And this is relevant to belonging, I think, because there are certain barriers that diverse talent face that others tend not to. And I've mentioned barriers before, haven't I? And this means you need to be aware of this, and you need to flex what you're doing and encourage your leaders to flex what they're doing. This may mean giving more support, for example, to some people than to others. So why does all this matter? I just want to share a couple of more stats with you if we go to the next slide. And some of these stats are really interesting. One of them is quite shocking, actually. So 50% of Black people experience racism at work in the UK. That's from a YouGov 2020 poll. 14% of workers consider themselves to have a mental health problem, and if it's for under 18s, that figure jumps to 27%. 90% of trans people experience harassment in the workplace. And then this one, only 13% of employees would be comfortable talking about mental illness at work. A 2017 poll by the charity Time for Change found that workers would rather talk to colleagues about sex or money than about mental health problems. People are more comfortable talking about sex at work or about money worries than they are talking about mental health. So you can see the kind of barriers and taboos that are present in the workplace that make it really hard to understand what belonging feels like for people who face those barriers and those taboos. I thought I'd give you a laugh. So on our next slide, I am not proposing that love in the workplace means floating around smiling endlessly. Yeah, we all have bad days. And I'm sure you've experienced a day like this where you just look at someone and you think, before you go any further, today is not the day, and I am not the one. So don't think that, when I talk about love in the workplace, it's all kind of rainbows and unicorns and sugar and spice. Obviously, the reality of work is it can be stressful and tough. But the question is, how do you still foster a sense of belonging and love while being efficient, effective, a good leader, a good team member, yeah? And just recognizing some days you don't get it right. One of my tips is I sometimes apologize in advance, right? So if I come into a work meeting and I know that I'm not in a great mood, I'll say that. I'll say, look, I've had a really tough morning. I'm not actually feeling very good at the moment. I'm in a bit of a bad mood. So if I'm grumpy, please forgive me. I'll calm down. Hopefully I'll be okay in an hour or so. Maybe I'll have another coffee. That might help. Yeah. So the next slide proposes a rather audacious idea of what it might be like to have love in action, because we've talked a lot about why love is taboo in the workplace. But here's an outrageous idea, is for your organization to conduct a love audit. Now you ask me, what is a love audit? Well, I've got to admit, I have no idea. It's a concept I created. I've not yet done one, but I'm dying to. So if anyone wants a love audit conducted, then let me know. I'm happy to do one. I know how to do other types of audit. I know how to do diversity and inclusion maturity diagnostics, for example. And this is a related idea. But I wonder, how would your employer feel about conducting a love audit? What might such an audit involve? Well, it might include some simple tools like the poll questions we did earlier. And here I'm going to share some results of a recent poll that I ran with a diverse group of HR practitioners. And this will give you a flavor of how these results might play out. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see actual results from the polls I asked you earlier. Does your organization understand the challenges people from outside the dominant group face? And the majority answer, with half of the respondents saying only to some degree. Very few people, only about 5%, said that their organization specifically understands all of the dimensions of the challenges that are faced. And then about a bit under a third said, my organization does understand this, but only in a general way. Yeah. And then there was more than 10% that my organization doesn't really understand these challenges. So you can see there's a lot of room to improve there, isn't there? There's a lot of space for organizations to be better at understanding these challenges that we've been talking about for diverse groups to feel that they belong. If we go to the next slide, this question is around, when it comes to inclusion, does your organization rely on process and policy or culture? And you remember we asked that question earlier. Well, there was the main result, a bit under a third said they rely more on process or policy, which is kind of what I expected. And then there was probably just under 25% said that it was equally on both. However, it dropped down to a bit above 15% when it was just more on culture. And then worryingly, nearly 25% of organizations don't pay much attention to either. And then if there's 5% who don't really pay attention to inclusion at all. Now, I'm not saying that culture is the answer, right? I think process and policy with culture is probably a requirement, but the fact that many organizations are not paying much attention to culture is a concern for me when it comes to inclusion. So if we go to the next slide there, please, and have a look at this one. Now, remember this question I asked, how often is love mentioned in your organization? Now, this one really hit me. You can see that half of respondents said that love is never mentioned. Right? The word love is never mentioned in their organization. And then, you know, a third roughly say not very often, and the only context it's mentioned is kind of when someone says they love their job. And then, you know, just under 20% said it's rarely mentioned. So no one said that it's mentioned constantly, and no one said that it's mentioned quite a bit. You can make what you will of those results. Using my hat as an inclusion expert and a leadership expert, I think there is a missed opportunity. I think there is, as a result of why the word love is taboo in the workplace, a untapped resource for creating belonging. And then the last slide shows, the next slide shows the bonus question, which is what is the one thing missing in the workplace that would make the biggest difference to inclusion? Look at that result. Yeah, a true sense of love and belonging. 3/4 of respondents said that that would make the biggest difference. And then there was a few who thought psychological safety, and an equal number thought either training or targeted support for minority colleagues. No one selected processes and policies. So that kind of suggests to me that people feel their organizations are probably paying attention to process or policy enough, but what they're not paying attention to is a true sense of love and belonging. And again, this screams out to me that there is a missed opportunity here, isn't there? So I hope you find those results interesting. I'd love to sort of explore those more potentially in your organizations. If that's something of interest to you, then please do get in touch. We're now going to talk about putting all of this into action, because I said there were sort of three elements. There was understanding why is the word love taboo in the workplace. There was thinking about what love in action might look like and what are the practical things we can do. So putting love into action, well, imagine this scenario. We could basically turn what we've been trained to do on its head, and we could turbocharge the solutions that seek to resolve those paradoxes we were talking about earlier around inclusion, and the temptation to rely too much on policy and process, by instead thinking about how we could respond from a place of love. So imagine an employer, your employer, taking a stand on a topic, for example, something involving Black colleagues who experience the pain of racism every day of their lives, everywhere they go. Imagine your organization communicating an action that is being taken to address this and saying, we've spoken to our Black colleagues to understand what they experience, to understand their pain, what it feels like for them when they experience racism. And as an act of love for our Black colleagues, our clients, our suppliers, and our stakeholders, we are doing X, Y, Z, whatever the initiative is. Or you could think of it in relation to trans colleagues. Imagine your organization, knowing that trans people experience transphobia every day of their lives, everywhere they go, including from other parts of the LGBT community. Saying something like, well, we've spoken to our trans colleagues to understand what it feels like for them to be excluded, to be threatened, to be attacked. Remember the stat I shared with you? 90% of trans people have been harassed in the workplace. So imagine your organization saying, we understand that, and we've spoken to our colleagues to understand what it feels like for them, and therefore, as an act of love for our trans colleagues, our trans clients and suppliers and stakeholders, we are going to do X, Y, Z. And then lastly, you might think, I don't know, imagine for bi people, People who experience bi erasure and bi invisibility, including from other parts of their own community, saying, we've spoken to our bi colleagues and we hear them describe what it feels like to experience biphobia. So as an act of love, we are doing XYZ. To me, that would be truly heading towards a radical belonging. Imagine a workplace where the main question you ask yourself when you want to know whether you belong there or not is, do I feel loved? So to close today, I thought it'd be good to just get you to exercise your thinking a bit. And so we've got a couple of scenarios. We're going to have a go at a few of these. We'll see how we go for time. We may not get through all of them, but we'll do some of them. The first scenario is that you're wondering whether your subordinate is racist. And this scenario plays out in the following way. You've got someone reporting to you whom you suspect might be biased against racial minorities. And the reason you suspect this is because it's come to your attention that two of the people working in your subordinate's team who are from ethnic minorities have failed to be promoted 3 times, while their white counterparts have been promoted. However, you're not sure, and you don't have any direct evidence, but you do have strong concerns, and you now feel you need to raise this issue with your subordinate. Just to be clear, it's the person who works for you who you think might be biased. So the question for you is, how do you have that conversation? How do you have an incredibly tricky and sensitive conversation with your subordinate whom you suspect might be racist? So put your comments in the chat. While you're doing that, I'm just picking up that Leslie has noted that diversity comes in many forms, both hidden and visible. We've got a sad face from Amy. I guess that was in relation to some of the stats that were posted earlier. They are quite challenging, aren't they? Some of those stats around how people experience the workplace. But whilst they make us sad, they're also a spur for us to get on and do something about it, aren't they? And to use the power of love to redress those stats and create that balance and that sense of belonging. So if you just pop in the comment there, any thoughts you have around how you could go about having this really tricky conversation. I think some of the things that might be helpful coming from a place of love are to start by being clear about what are the facts and what are the assumptions. Yeah, so separating out facts and assumptions could be really a helpful place to start. So what are you assuming and what do you know for a fact? In this case, it could be that the only thing you know for a fact is that these 2 colleagues have failed to be promoted 3 times. And then you would need to understand what the reasons are for that, wouldn't you? So you might want to review, I don't know, the relevant performance and promotion records of the various candidates to understand what has been documented and what hasn't. You might want to speak to others who've got an informed view about this, and particularly people who've got an impartial view on those promotion cases. Framing the conversation as a discussion about the performance of the people in that subordinate's team could be a way to start. And I see a comment there from Emma saying, don't start with a racism question, ask for evidence around promoting some and not others. And then if it's justified, that's great, but talk to the colleagues and their feelings. So that's excellent, Emma. You've picked up exactly what I've suggested there around kind of seeking out the facts, framing this as not being about you're racist, but rather, why have these people not been successful in being promoted? Maybe ask your subordinate open questions about what they think the strengths and weaknesses of the people in their team are. And you could kind of perhaps probe for evidence to support the promotion decisions for the individuals who were held back. You know, if there is strong enough evidence there and it is objective and it is backed up, then as Emma says, you know, you've got evidence there. And then perhaps explore what steps your subordinate has taken to support the development of those individuals. You know, having denied them promotion several times, has your subordinate taken steps to support them and develop them? Now, what do you do if your concerns around bias are confirmed? So you might need to consider carefully whether any further investigations are needed before continuing that conversation, which might involve speaking to the individuals concerned and to other colleagues You'll then have processes, no doubt, in your organization you need to follow. Amy says you need to be looking at areas of development so those people can be promoted. So excellent, that's exactly right. Let's not just focus on potential racism of your subordinate, but let's think about the people who might need the support as well. I'll just do a check with Andrea around how we're going for time, because I've got a couple more scenarios, but we can allocate those out as homework if that's better.
Yeah, maybe one or two more scenarios.
All right, so
yeah.
Let's go on to the next one perhaps. So is a member of your team experiencing transphobic bullying? So in this scenario, you're concerned about a member of your team because you've become aware that they're not performing as well as they usually do, and you suspect some members of their team are subjecting them to bullying. Now, you don't know whether your team member is actually trans or not. It's not something you've ever discussed with that person, and they are not open about it with you or anyone else, not that you're aware of. You therefore have a suspicion this person could be trans, but you don't know for sure. So how do you have a conversation with your team member? How do you have a conversation with this potentially trans person in your team you think is being transphobically bullied? Very sensitive, isn't it? So again, comments in the chat would be really helpful. You might want to consider some issues here. So one thing might be, without breaching confidentiality, you could consider other appropriate colleagues you could discuss your concerns with, people that you know you can refer to. And you may not name the colleague, for example, but you could say, look, I have a team member, I have the following concerns. So you could get a view from other people who are informed and impartial and who you trust. If you are going to talk to this person, you really need to establish a safe space for the conversation. Place emphasis on confidentiality as appropriate, and then you could state what you've observed. For example, I've seen a drop in your performance, yeah? And you could state that you're concerned and you would like to offer your help and support. You could reassure them that this is not a performance management conversation, i.e. it's not a negative conversation. And then ask the person whether they agree with your observations about what you've seen around the drop in performance and what might be causing that. Ask open questions to draw out any concerns that the person has, and maybe ask that person how they feel about the team. If appropriate, you could explore with that person how would they describe the behaviour of others in the team. And if it becomes clear to you that there is indeed bullying, you can then inform them of their options and you can signpost them to support and agree on next steps. If they disclose in that conversation that they are trans, then you should thank them for sharing that personal information, reassure them that you will respect their confidentiality of that, and ask if they would like any support, and then agree on the next steps. Now, we're getting some great comments in the chat around ask them if they're having issues, let them know it's a safe space and confidential. That's awesome, Amy. Don't ask them if they are trans. Correct. It's generally not a great idea to come to someone and say, are you trans? They're going to feel incredibly threatened by that and potentially confronted. Challenge the bullying behaviour, so that's great. So Rebecca, if it is confirmed that there is indeed bullying, then you've got something you need to address, isn't it, in the appropriate way? And then John, again, making clear statements to the team about it being a safe place, and we should all feel able to end any worries we have. And I think that's a great piece of advice, John, to widen this out to the whole team. Yeah, use it as an opportunity to remind everyone in the team that we want this team to be a safe place for people. And then Emma says, talk to them, create a safe space, talk about confidentiality, talk about the drop in performance, what can I do to support you? So these are all excellent responses. I'm not going to do the rest of the scenarios, but I'm just briefly going to share them. So if Andrea could just flick to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I think there's one above. This one is one of your staff members experiencing, sorry, back to scenario 3. Or forward to scenario 3. There we go. Is one of your staff members experiencing mental health issues? And again, I would suggest that the response to that is very similar to the one we just dealt with. Create a safe space, state what you've observed. I've seen a drop in performance. How can I support, etc. Yeah. And then the bonus ones These are homework, by the way. You're going to take these away and do them as homework. You'll get them in the pack. So here's one that says, you've got the leader of your organization, yeah, or your boss, for example, saying, I don't think we have any issues around D&I in this team. No issues around diversity and inclusion, because no one's ever complained to me. How do you tackle that? How do you have a conversation with your boss over that statement? Now, you may think there's nothing wrong with that statement, or you might think, hang on, as a leader, you can't rely on just someone coming to you to complain. You should be looking actively at how diverse your team is and how included people are. Do they feel they belong? And then the last scenario as homework, if we go forward a slide, is hearing the head of your organization make statements that are not inclusive in language. For example, they might say something like, I don't care what color you are. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what ethnicity you are. I don't care about your sexual orientation. I'm not interested. All I care about is that you do good work. I treat everyone the same. And again, you might think, well, that's a fair comment. You know, he or she is being very unbiased. But are they also signaling that they don't care about your identity, that your race doesn't matter to them, is not important? So that's a bit of homework. And then the final piece of homework is I want you to translate all of this into action. Yeah. So how do we create love and belonging in the workplace? Based on all that we've discussed today, I'd love you to go away and make a list of things that could foster belonging in your organization. And it could be all the stuff we've done around creating a safe space for people, recognizing that not all diversity is visible, having a think about the language you use, looking for opportunities to challenge your organization where you don't think it's creating belonging. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I know Andrea has got a couple of other bits to share with you now, so I'll hand back to Andrea. And I just want to say thanks everyone for your amazing comments. It's been a really rich discussion.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, David. That was a really thought-provoking session, and there's definitely things that I've learned and take away from this as well. Obviously very much mindful of timing for questions and answers, but we have had fantastic feedback and comments, and you know, people's sharing their own experiences in the chat box, so thank you so much. What I am going to do though is I'm just going to pop my email address into the chat box now, and if you do have any questions for David or myself, please feel free to get in touch with us. David does run various sessions. We can talk to you about programs, training for you yourself or your organization. So please do take note of my email address if you do have questions or would like to find out more about the training that David does deliver. As mentioned earlier on in the session, David will be our lead facilitator for our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Virtual Summit, which will be taking place on the 22nd of September. David, what can the audience expect on the day?
So yeah, this will be a fantastic summit. Do hope you can join us for this. We're going to explore this theme around building a better working world. There's going to be a range of keynote speakers with some fantastic panel discussions, and importantly, sharing of personal stories delivered by leaders and influencers and change makers. So you get kind of a great mix of, you know, the theory and the practice, as it were, but also the personal stories. And that's the bit that I always find really gets me in. Because we know that the pandemic has changed the way we work forever, and we want to kind of understand what does that new world look like and what will it be like for our workforces. So come along and you'll get a chance not only to get great insights, hear that personal sharing, but also an opportunity to network with others, to expand your network and to build your own career.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, and we're really excited. So hopefully we'll see everyone there on the 22nd of September. In order to find out more about the summit and to sign up, please do visit our website, which is www.civilservicecollege.org.uk. You can also sign up to our training alerts to find out more about the webinars that we run, our courses, projects, and so on. So please do visit our website. We are also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube. That is our social media handle, which is @cscollege.org. So please do follow us. This session has been recorded. You will receive the video and the slides probably in the next day or next week. But I just want to say one big final thank you to David for your time. That was fantastic. And to our audience members, we hope to see you very, very soon. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.